All of you in Zoom will need to acknowledge that this is being recorded, and what happens is it does go to YouTube at the end of the day so that other people can also benefit that weren't able to be here. So just briefly, I'll go around here. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So I'm Julian Lee, I'm the sustainability educator here. On the left you have Steve Batley, who's our landscape architect and permaculture expert. And on the right, we're really pleased to have Gavin Smith, who is our native bee expert guest presenter here. Now, as usual, we're at the Randwick Sustainability Hub. Because it's raining, we're in the sustainable classroom. And one of the cool features here is that those bricks behind everybody are reused. So they've been reclaimed from some house that's been knocked down, and we've reused them to turn it into this building, the outdoor classroom. We are on Gadigal and Vidigal land, so I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So welcome to all of you in Zoom. Love that you're here. As I was saying to some of the people earlier, we do have you on a speaker, on a tripod, so please speak up. Rather than writing in chat, as we've all been really well trained to do, we're trying to go back to where we thoughtfully call out, particularly if Steve and Gavin are asking questions. But also, if you have a question and it's an appropriate time, feel free to speak up and say, excuse me. I think everyone, along those lines, to make it a bit more personal, it is really nice if you have your names there and perhaps even leave your video on, because it is nice to see who's here. And because this is number 3 in a 10-part series, we're going to be starting to see some familiar faces, and as you might have heard at the beginning, get a bit friendly. Great time to turn your telephones off. And please register before the workshop to get any handouts. What I usually do is schedule for anything that you need to be emailed to you a bit beforehand, which if you don't register or register right at the last minute, you won't get that email either. But feel free to contact me afterwards if you are missing something. So, nice, that was 3 minutes. Over to Steve and Gavin. Thank you.
Julian, what a performance. Perfect. Hi guys, hi everyone.
Hello.
Hello everybody. Really glad to have Gavin here today. So today's all about native bees, as you probably know. Gavin's got some real knowledge on the subject and some awesome pictures and some awesome stuff to show you guys. Most of today is Gavin doing his thing and sharing his knowledge and telling you guys all about native bees and what they look like, what they eat, and how to get them coming and living in your garden. So that's the really interesting bit. I think we had quite a few of you guys were here last week. We'll start with a quick review and then we'll get into the bees and then we'll do some plants at the end. And this is the call out moment. What those of you who were here last week, what do you remember?
That Messi's good.
Messi's good. Yeah. I'll give you some framework. It's actually good for you guys to tap into the grey matter and pull out what we did last week. Apparently that helps cement it into your minds. So I'll give you a painful recovery.
What of the pioneer plants?
Yes.
Wattle and nitrogen in the soil, puts nitrogen in the soil.
Yep, the wattles and the pioneers that can do that. Yep.
We looked at how soil develops.
Yes. Sorry?
We spoke about habitat value and diversity.
We also spoke about the nitrogen fixating bacteria and fungi, their importance in the whole scheme of things.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Sorry, I wasn't there, so.
That's okay.
Food
Yeah, so
web,
this is.
sorry, the
Sorry,
food
Gavin.
web, the food web and plant succession.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, good. I think that's pretty much what we covered last week. So thanks for sharing that. It's also good for the guys, for the people who've been working last week to get a feel for what we did. And it was really the theme of last week is building an ecosystem. So what is it? What's an ecosystem, and how how can we start thinking about how ecosystems are built and created? And a few of you guys mentioned some of the key processes around that, and that's the plants grow. What's one thing you didn't mention in terms of what plants do?
They create flowers.
Yes. What's one of the fundamental drivers of any living system, particularly involving plants, or any living system? We'll go right back, think about the sun. I'll give you.
Food and water.
Yep. And what do the leaves do?
Photosynthesis.
Yes, right, cool. So photosynthesis, I knew we'd get it. So the sun's energy shines onto the leaves, the plant draws that energy and makes sugars and builds carbon and puts it in the ground. And we talked about the symbiotic relationship that plants have, and a few of you guys mentioned bacteria and fungi in the soil. So the plants are actually taking that energy and they're feeding the soil organisms, and in turn the soil organisms feed the plant, and the plant grows, and then that's how the cycle starts. So there's all these what we call symbiotic relationships between the plant and the microorganisms under the ground, and that eventually over time builds into a really complex food web. So lots of different animals kind of feed off that basic system. And today and next week and probably the week after, we're looking at that. That same sort of idea, those systems that are created, we're moving into above the ground. So under the ground, the roots use sugars for the bacteria and the fungi. What's a relationship above the ground? What do plants do to have a symbiotic relationship above the ground, do you think?
Pollinator.
Yes, pollinators. So they produce flowers. So under the ground, they produce sugars to feed the critters. Above the ground, the plants, well, they produce food for the moving parts of the forest. So things like native bees and birds. So the plants expend a lot of energy to feed moving parts. So insects, flying things. And what do they get in return? They get pollination. So it's a symbiotic relationship above the ground as well as below the ground. Excuse me, I forgot that. I know that was going somewhere. Yeah, that was it. That was the point. So that I'll pass over to Gavin now. So the bees in Australia are really interesting. So I'm really keen.
Yes, I always have to put an warning anything involved with this particular talk in the future. There's a virus. It's called the bee brain virus. Once you start dealing with bees, it gets into your head, and you start reading, and you will find that you will be hooked, as I was about 10 years ago. The first bee that I came across, I was involved with composting worms, with maggots, and all sorts of things, but bees came into my life as Tetragonia carbonara, tiny black bee, which we know as the sugar bag bee. It was a visit to Michael Malt's place over at Chippendale, and I'd worked with him on training trainers for our community gardens, and he presented me with this exposure to this bee and this brain, this brain virus, and I was hooked. The tiny thing produced the most amazing structures, the most beautiful spiral designs, and we'll take you over now and I'll show you what you can see. The actual bee itself is very small. You see, that's my thumb there, and it's got about 20 bees on it. But when you open these hives, you've got to be aware that it's the most beautiful spiral, following Fibonacci's numbers. Look that up if you don't know about Fibonacci. And they store their honey, which is actually not honey as you know it. It's actually almost pure nectar, and their pollen, which is their protein. So the protein is the pollen, the honey or nectar is the sugars, and they have a very balanced diet. And these little bees are very productive. They'll fill a box like that in 12 months. Over here are some examples of the little pots they put their nectar in, and they gradually close them right off so that they're hermetically sealed. Now, these are one of about 11, 12 varieties that actually build a colony, as related to what most of you know as a beehive. But the majority of our 2,000 varieties of bees are in fact solitary. So they're only this small number of bees that form a super colony. The rest, they're all solitary. Where do they live? All around you. Some people never see them, but once you get hooked with the virus, you'll see them all over the place. And I'll show you the most common ones that are in Sydney at the moment. Well, they're not actually at the moment because it's too cold. Most of them are living in an environment which is a closed environment. So they'll be under the ground. They'll be inside hollows in trees. They'll be inside other insect holes that they're put in, like boring holes that borers have made. And others will be inside the stems of plants. So you have your borers underground, you have your borers in stems, and you have those that live in other borers holes. So you've got three varieties. They're solitary. Some of them have very special characteristics, which I'll go through when we have to look at the specific bees. Other bees are dependent on other bees. We have a number of bees that are cuckoo bees. Same as a bird, they will take another bee's nest to make it their own, lay their eggs so that they get fed by the other bee. So there's symbiosis all through. Now, an interesting thing has happened. A man observed in about 1986 that bees were actually scrabbling in around the roots of some trees, and he observed that it didn't make a connection. And he realized after some time that these bees are actually going for mycelium in the ground. They were taking something from the mycelium back to their hive. Now, we know that there are a lot of diseases that bees have been affected by overseas and here in Australia. And it appears that the research is going on now, and the bees are actually using fungi as an antibiotic and as an immune system booster. So that's a whole new field of science which is opening up.
So mycelium.
Mycelia, yeah. And again, another symbiotic relationship. Now, I'll take you through the other groups that we have of the bees that are native and some non-native.
What mycelium is?
Sorry?
Can you tell us what mycelium is?
It's mycelia. Sorry, they're just wondering what mycelia is.
Oh, mycelia. It's actually a fungus that grows on the ground, and it spreads over everything, and it's converting dead matter into living matter and protein, and all the other things that go with it, minerals, the vitamins, and so on. So it's essential to plant growth, and we've discovered it's essential to bees growth as well. And yeah.
Thank you.
They're very, very fine hair-like structures. Look at that. It's fascinating. I have a friend who's an expert on mushrooms and all things related to fungus, and there's an excellent documentary which you can look at. And I'll think of the name of it later.
The Fabulous World of Fungi.
That's the one.
Yeah, someone mentioned that last week.
I highly recommend you watch it. Anyway, so, okay, I will get up now and I'll have a look at some of the photographs that I put up, and we can have a look at those that are living in different environments. Now these two examples are found in your garden. This is the blue-banded bee, and bees, Australian native bees, are often classified by the length of their tongue. Now this particular individual has an extremely long tongue for getting into the very, very deep flowers. This is a honeysuckle flower, and she's able to put her tongue between the florets into the base of the honeysuckle, which, as you know, if you've ever chewed it, delicious. So she will build her homes in the cement between the bricks in your old homes. Have a look. They usually find a sheltered spot. So that's the blue-banded bee. And if you want to be really entertained, look up on YouTube a thing called blue-banded bees. Oh dear, I'll get back to it. I'm sorry, I've got it. Blue-banded bees kung fu fighting, right? Native bee specialists are real nuts when it comes to putting music to behavior. This one is a very large bee, and it's called, for some reason, the teddy bear bee. This one is actually asleep. It's gripped onto a piece of stick there, and is resting. And that's where these two bees roost at night. You'll find them as little bunches of bees hanging off very small twigs. You'll see them looking for a roost on kung fu fighting. Now this is a cuckoo bee that is going underground or inside these two bees' nests. So she's a burrower. This one is burrowing into clay. This one goes underground, and this one will lay the eggs. Now she's called the neon bee because she flashes as she flies. Very beautiful bee. Over here we have the borer bees. This one is one of the largest bees in Australia. It's the Carpenter Bee, and the greater Carpenter Bee also is quite similar in size, but usually has a covering of fur which is yellow on the thorax. So these bees will drill holes into the stems of plants and hollow them out. Now they may have several females living in one stem, but they'll have separate entrances. So they're a semi-social bee, right? So they're called the Carpenter bees, and as I say, very large bees. They will be out very soon in September, and if you want to see them, I would suggest you go up to Moogamurra Nature Reserve off the old Pacific Highway near Hawkesbury. Only opens for a very short time on weekends. It's worth a look. They will come past your ear and you duck. They're so loud. Similarly to the teddy bears. Another beautiful little pollinator. This is the leafcutter bee. Now she lines her nest with circular sections of leaves taken from plants. Now their favourite, believe it or not, is the rose bush. A friend of mine lives in Balmain, and he said, "Your bloody bees, they've attacked my roses again." I said, "Whatever you do, don't spray them." And he said, "My wife would let any sprays in the house once she found out that they were bees." But they will line the inside of their nest with the leaves, and then they will close off each compartment as they lay their eggs. So they've got these separate living rooms where the babies can then hatch and eat a mixture of pollen and nectar which is left behind for them by their parent bee. So this is the leaf cutter. It's quite small, but it has this amazing quantity of fur underneath the abdomen. So they collect so much pollen. It's just an amazing pollinator. All bees are, of course, covered in fur, and it's the fur which actually gives them their colour. Beautiful little specialist bee. It's called the Yellow Mast Bee. You can see the yellow pattern on the front, yellow sections above the legs. And again, it's living in the Banksia. Now, oftentimes our native plants are dependent on specific bees. So if a bee fails, it means that a whole section, a whole series of plants will fail as well. So that's something that is so important, the relationship between bees and plants and so on. Now this next one is not a bee, but it pretends to be a bee. It's actually a fly, and you probably see it, and wow, what the heck is it? It's actually a hoverfly. But again, it's a pollinator. So you have lots of varieties of bees and other insects that are all doing pollination for you. But one of the things I would like to mention at this stage is the sorts of things that you can do to make homes for your bees. Now this one was developed by a very wonderful bee person who started Pollinator Week in Australia in November, and that's Megan Halcroft. She's at the University of Western Sydney, and she has also made this one as a prototype using some corrugated iron as a roof and hardwood with a variety of hole sizes drilled in. We try to make the drills as long as possible. They're only about $30 each, but it's a wonderful thing. They're a specific drill. These are some that I've put together in the workshops. Now, these love holes. These are the remains of a previous generation of bees. This particular bee has used cellulose to make an entrance which is automatically opening and closing. As she pushes through, it'll close behind her. It's very, very similar to a lens on the camera. When they come out, they open and close. She just pushes the fibers aside, and that keeps any other nasties out. Some of these others are covered in material which is usually resin, and they use the resin from trees to block their holes off. Some of the resin changes colour, and some of them actually, this one is a type of wasp. And people automatically say, oh, wasps. There are just as many wasps, different varieties as there are in the bee family. And again, not all of them are stinging. They only sting if they have a large colony like honeybees. And somebody asked me, oh, do native bees sting? They do have a sting, but they don't use it on people. It tends to be on other insects. The only casualty I know is a friend of mine who rescued a blue-banded bee from a spider's web, and it bit her. All these bees have jaws.
Okay, cool. So I just had a question about these is what you call bee hotels?
Yes, we call them bee hotels. The bigger they are, they become homesteads.
Okay. So this one,
yes.
Let's go through it. So this, I'm taking out this roof is sort of the process of what this roof's
exactly.
Also keeps it dry. Yes. If we look underneath, you can see that's about 200 mil. Yeah. So these holes, how deep do these holes go into that 200 millimeter?
Well, as far as possible. They can go up to 100, 150,
yeah.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how long the hole is. The more depth you get, the more babies the bee can create.
Okay. So these are
that's hardwood blocks.
Yeah.
And the maximum that you can have your holes, we find that anything over about 8 millimeters, too big.
It's too big. Okay. So there's some really small ones here.
Yes. There are bees that are that small.
Okay. Cool.
And yeah.
And what do the bees do in here?
Well, the female will come in after she's mated, and she will bring in pollen and nectar. She'll mix that together to make a loaf. Yeah. And she'll put that inside and lay an egg on top and close it off, whether it be a leaf or resin or cellulose. And then she'll go up and she'll more honey, more pollen, mix it up, lay another egg on top. And so it's progressive right to the end. And then as they mature, the babies will hatch, they'll eat the food, they go through the same process of other insects going through from larvae and so on, and they'll hatch and they'll fly out. The mother is already died, she's gone. She's only there for a short time. Like any insect, they have to lay eggs and disappear.
Okay. How long do they live for?
It's a very good question. I can't answer that. These are for a specific number of bees, the ones that live in hollows. Right? If you want to keep these guys alive, the growing bees, then you need to reserve an area of undisturbed soil in the garden. I have a very good friend who lives at North Turramurra, and she and I have built hives at her place and bee hotels. And there was a particular section on her lawn which had some mesh on it. And I walked on the mesh and she said, "Get off the bees!" And sure enough, at a certain time in spring, this whole area just emerges with tiny black bees.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So they literally burrow into the ground.
Yes, some of them are extremely big.
Yeah, okay.
We're talking meters and meters and meters.
And what sort of conditions does that ground, like,
It's sandy soil in some areas, it's clay soil.
does it need to be dry? Can it be out in the weather, or is it?
Yes, it's out in the weather.
It's just a random piece of dirt.
Water just goes to a certain depth.
Yeah, okay.
So we have to see.
Sure. I want to take some of these.
Yes, oh, that's a good thought. Okay. Sorry, this is the quickest way to make a habitat. It's just a bundle. The diameters, that's too big. If you have something so big, you don't want it if you can help it. But if you can't help it, put some straws, paper straws inside. Paper straws, claim for native bees. It's just a good, they don't like plastic straws. But paper straws, they will go in. And you can actually make your own paper straws as well by wrapping paper and just a little bit of glue or paste and on a knitting needle, for example. You get a variety of different knitting needles or wires, and that's sufficient for as a class exercise for children, and very easily made. I use rubber bands to start it off with, and then I use wire to bind over the top, or you can glue them with a hot glue gun and just hang them underneath a shelter, right, on a piece of the wire, so they are out of the weather, and bees will find it, and so will some of the wasps.
So Gavin, there's a question, because it's not so easy to see, but what is that bamboo? Is that a good material to use?
I have two varieties of bamboo that I use. Any bamboo will do it, but it's best if it's difficult to cut without crushing bamboos. Others are quite firm, and I usually wait till the whole thing is dried out and then saw it. Yes, and you can use a very good sharp secateurs when it's green, and then put it into a container to let it dry. If you let it dry, it's easier to tape up. It doesn't shrink and fall apart.
You can I've seen them also made out of, like, there are a lot of plants in the garden that have that hollow structure. Even I think old tomato stems have a bit of a hollow in it, and some of your salvias and
Yes, salvias are particularly good.
yeah, they don't last as long, I guess, as bamboo.
I think so. Depends where you put it. If it's out of the weather, fine. even lantana.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, even if it's got a pithy centre, the bees will often hollow that out as well. I think the other thing with tetragonula, the little native beehive, there you might find them in a tree somewhere nearby. I suggest you look along the footpath. I know of one particular spot where they've made their home inside a telecommunications box underground. They'll also make them inside your electrical fuse boxes and so on. Okay. You could get lucky.
Yeah. So maybe we can visit our beehive outside in a sec. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone got some questions about what Gav's talked about so far?
Yes, it's Kerry here. Can you tell me what's the best aspect in a garden for a bee hotel? Like in the shade or the sun or on the fence?
Yeah, they're like everybody else. They like to get up in the morning when the sun's up, and then they don't like it too hot during midday. So some area where it gets early morning sun and then shade, so they don't get overheated.
Thank you.
And I've got a question too, please. I'm Nikki. The one that you showed us at the beginning was the tetragonula, which is that's not happening in a bee hotel, is it? That's more of a native beehive.
That's right. That is one of the very, very small percentage of the number of bees in Australia. So it's only 11 or 12 out of 2,000.
So
it's very small.
Is it worth trying to put a native beehive in the garden as well as the bee hotels?
Yes, they're all pollinated. That's the main thing. In fact, the concern is that the honeybee will fail because we are expecting the arrival of varroa mite and other diseases because of international travel. So the number of tetragonula hives that are being created now is to possibly take over, in orchards particularly, the role of the honeybee.
Thanks.
The trouble is they only fly for 500 metres from their hive. They don't go 5 kilometres as the honeybee does. So you have to concentrate on a large number of hives within that orchard to make it worthwhile.
I've got lots of blue-banded bees and even teddy bear bees in my garden, but I was thinking about whether I should put a bee hotel in, a beehive in, as well as just leaving space for the others.
Yes, I think they don't compete terribly much. We were worried initially that the honeybees would take over their role and their habitat, but they all coexist quite happily. They're not people.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think you're onto something, Nikki. So you've got the hives, and you can buy hives and put them in, and that's probably the best way to do it, unless you're lucky enough that a colony of tetragonula bees move in and make their homes in your garden, but probably unlikely around here.
You can get lucky, but tetragonula has become very expensive. I could not believe it. They're now over $500 for a small hive. That's a problem.
Yeah. So so you can do that, and they're great because what they do is they'll fly out and they'll pollinate all your plants for you, which we've got hives here, and we see them on all of our veggies. They're not fussy about where they get their nectar and their pollen from, so they're really useful in all sorts of gardens. And I guess the other 1,990 varieties of native bees are actually solitary bees, and there are some that are quite common, and they're doing the same thing. So they will just voluntarily come and live in your garden if you got the right conditions. Yep. And they will do the same thing. Like the blue-banded bees, they love mint and sage.
I always say the bees for bees. The basil, orange, and Betsy.
There you go. So it's a different approach. It's a different way, different animal altogether. Well, altogether, but and they have very different needs because they're solitary. So that's when the bee hotels come in handy. But they all need flowers, don't they?
Exactly. And the greater variety, the better. Because the bees are foragers. They don't like a single, I'm going to use for a few of them anyway. So, but yes, multiple flowers. Yeah.
I've got a question. If you have a beehive, do you have to make sure that you've got enough flowers and vegetation nearby to support the bees of that hive?
I love that question because people often say to me, I never see a bee in my garden. Why? And I say, well, you don't have to look in your garden. One of the simplest things to do is look up and look and see what's on the top of the trees, because it's also a good indication to see how much pollination is, or pollen and nectar is in your area. Go onto Zoom, look at your house, zoom out, see how many trees are in your area, because people forget to look up. And trees are covered at different times of the year with the most amazing array of flowers. You know, you're looking at tons of nectar, tons of pollen. And yeah, it's a simple exercise, but it's a really worthwhile one to see what the bees can forage on in your spot.
I have a question.
Hi,
Just give me 1 second, because I can see Sharon and Amanda. But a related question from Sophie is it, well, I'm going to alter it slightly. She's asked, what should I plant to encourage native bees? But, you know, are you saying perhaps then we don't need to because there's all the trees, or?
It depends on if you've got an area where I live in Beehive, right? We've got a very old established suburb with very, very large tree growth, and which you know, we keep encouraging councils to put in more trees, please. You know? And there are a lot of beekeepers in my area, in the inner city. Why? Because of tree plantation and also established gardens. There are some beautiful gardens. If you walk the streets of Sydney, Cleve, all those inner city areas, there's some fabulous gardens. And yeah, so get into the flowers.
Okay.
Gavin, it's Lindsay here. What height is comfortable? I had someone recently ask me if they could put a native beehive on their veranda on the 7th floor of a building, bearing in mind we're in urban living.
I understand. Yes, I get this question a lot. People that are living in apartments and so on. Can I have a beehive? You can. Bees will fly to any height. They live on the tops of trees. And you'll find that from memory, I had a swarm of honeybees on the 9th floor in Pitt Street to remove in a rooftop building. They'd gone into a plant when they swarmed, and that was my job to get those bees out and bring them down 9 floors to the ground and rehive them. So your native bees are able to fly any height you like, and if you want them on your 7th floor, you put yourself a native beehive, and they.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
I have a quick question.
A couple more questions.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. What's the best place actually to get a beehive, like a native beehive, from? And the other question is how to get the bees, like from where to get the bees, in order to.
You're talking about native beehives.
Yeah, or
The best.
different types of beehives.
The best place to. You have to buy them, unfortunately.
Of course, yeah, that's fine, yeah.
But the best place to buy them from is Karingaya Council at Gordon.
Right.
They have had a scheme going for more than 10 years where they put hives into their municipality free, if you're a member there. And in order to keep their people employed to look after those bees, they now sell each year quite a large number. Now, if you want it cheaper, you can buy 10 hives, and it costs about $400 a hive, and they'll throw in an extra hive. But you have to get
I wouldn't have a place for 10 hives, but
But I'm saying, if you have a large number of people who want the same type of bee, then if you pool your resources, you're able to get it cheaper from Community Council.
So what should we, like, how, like, from what I read, is like there are like 2 boxes and 1 box or 2. How can we start? Like, how many boxes we start with and all of this? I'm still I'm very new of like for the subject.
Yeah. So what I recommend is that Sharif?
Yeah.
Yeah, I reckon. Hi, how you going?
Good, thank you.
What I would recommend, I think it's part of our policy, Randwick Council policy, is to, there are other providers as well. So there's lots of places you can get. I mean, Community Council is probably awesome, and probably other places. There are other places you can get native beehives, and we probably don't have the time, unfortunately, in this kind of context, to go into the nitty-gritty of how it exactly works. But look, there's heaps of information. Bring around. It's really simple. You can just get a box, put it on the wall in the right spot, northeast facing, and they come with the bees and they're set up and they're ready to go. So, yeah, but they're fascinating, really fascinating things. When you literally look inside, they've got these amazing kind of spiral patterns, and it's incredible. So I recommend, go down that bee hole, we'll call it, and look into it, because it's really cool.
Could I suggest at this stage, if you have some of these hives here, that we have a special day when you actually advertise people come to actually watch, and I'll do a split for you. It's it's what really hooked me on bees in the first place when I saw this thing, this amazing design.
Yeah, it's very cool.
It's great.
I think
Excuse me, Samantha here. I don't know if this question is relevant to the workshop, but you can tell me if it is or not. But I'm just wondering, in terms of climate change, and how, there was, after last year's bushfires, there was so much discussion about how bees were being impacted by that. Is there any evidence of native bees, say in Sydney, being impacted by the smoke? And is this something that we need to be thinking about in relation to, are there certain places that, you need to place your beehive if, climate is getting hotter, and how is this going to have like the long-term kind of impact on bees?
I haven't quite got that, but it's very broken up.
Yeah, I think.
Can you ask that again?
Yeah, I think probably the answer is we don't know. The effect of climate change on bees.
Right. Oh, well, it is having an effect. Yes, definitely. For example, Tetragonula carbonaria actually came from North Queensland. Guess what? It's now being replaced by a bee which is even further north, in Brisbane. We had a very embarrassing day here, because Tim Hearn, who is the expert from doing all the study on this bee, he brought a hive here to show us a split of Tetragonula carbonaria. And we all had our cameras ready, expecting to see this beautiful spiral shape. And guess what? When he opened the hive, it didn't have a spiral. It was a completely different bee, which is called Ostraclavia. And he was most embarrassed, because it can't exist in Sydney over a long period of time. So he had to take that all the way back home again to Brisbane, which was, I found it quite amusing at the time, but yeah. So they are displacing other bees as the place warms up. Now, I do know that this Tetragonula, which started in North Queensland, has gone down as far as Beehive. They're even talking about can we put it in Melbourne? I said, no, Melbourne's still too cold. Nobody really wants to be in Melbourne.
It's quarantined anyway. So,
Thanks for that.
I think too, my understanding of the beehives, if it gets too hot, they can actually physically melt. So if you put it in a spot that gets afternoon sun, and if as the climate warms up, so you just need to, placement of the hive is really important. And I think if it's below a certain temperature outside, the bees don't come out. If it's too cold,
yes, they have an inbuilt thermometer, 18 degrees. That's when they come out. You can actually predict it. The other thing is, of course, if they get too hot. So if you've got a hot day predicted, over 30 degrees, you put a wet sack over the top, something to keep the whole thing cool and in the shade. If you have an air-conditioned home, bring them into the air-conditioned, just close off the front with a bit of mesh, rolled mesh, and that will help them survive. But there's nothing worse to get your hive with dead bees being washed out by their own honey. Disgusting.
Yeah. So
Gavin, what's the situation when you've just put a new native beehive into the garden and it gets invaded by a very close, well, there's other native bees around because there's this huge fight that happens. Is this something that's really regular in the placement of new native beehives in an area?
I understand, yes. It's a territorial battle, and it's a battle to the death.
So,
the bees lock together,
yeah.
they lock on with their jaws and their legs, and that's it. They will not unclamp at all. Now what happens, we worried about this a lot, but generally what happens is the stronger hive will survive and you'll end up with a stronger hive even though it gets invaded by another hive. So the area in front of the hive and around the hive will be carpeted with dead bees. I mean a carpet. Horrendous.
So does that mean you're leaving
become stronger.
someone in the neighbourhood without bees in their hive?
They will have, either you'll have their bees or they'll have your bees, or both. It's a mixture.
Currently, 500 metres is the magic number. If you can keep your hives 500 metres apart, but you don't always have control over that.
Doesn't matter. The bees will look after each other. I've got hives, I've got 4 hives at home. 2 that are exactly 6 feet apart. Other hives would stack one on top of the other. Side by side. It doesn't really matter. Once they've got over their territorial demands for each other, they settle down and they become stronger hives.
I have a question about back to the solitary bees, so the ones that will come and voluntarily to their garden. Are they active all year, or do they have?
No, they're seasonal. Some bees live very, very short time. Others will live quite an extended period of time. The Carpenter Bees, for example. And I was actually had the teddy bear bee, the burrowing bee, came past me 3 weeks ago to a yellow plant beside the tram station at Lewisham. I heard the bee go past, and you react very quickly. And you think, what was that? And there it was, sitting there, a beautiful big teddy bear bee feeding from that flower. It may have been the last delivery of pollen and nectar that bee was going to do before it died. Yeah.
Okay, so you know roughly what months in this area most of them will be
They're going to start emerging. They're going to start emerging in September. We usually say September right through, and that was probably June.
Okay, so most of the year they're around. So
Most of the year around.
A couple of months in the really cold.
Yeah. There was one particular, I didn't realise there were bees until I threw a net. Or a curtain. It was a curtain. I threw a curtain at these insects. A whole bunch of them were flying about. And I trapped them. They were a very, very small bee, whose name escapes me. But they were actually having a mating flight at that stage, and there was a huge number, probably 1,000 bees, but you couldn't see them. Yeah, they were too fast. Just realised that there was a cloud of insects. So yeah, if you're not sure,
Fascinating.
That's cool.
go for it.
Yeah, so I think Gavin mentioned you can categorise your solitary bees into these long tongues, yes, short tongue, yes. So the long tongue bees, funnily enough, have a long tongue. Short tongues have a short tongue. So how will that influence what these guys do in terms of the plants that they choose for their garden? Oh dear, briefly.
Let's say, for example, you all are aware of the flowers, say, give me an example.
Flowers that have flowers.
Sorry, Coriander, we did. Yes, something which has a lot of very, very small flowers. Of course, the grass tree, the Xanthorrhea, for example, the Xanthorrhea stem, right? It is covered in millions of flowers, tiny, tiny flowers. Guess what? Tetragonula are all over, and most of other bees are the same. The Xanthorrhea is one of the favourite stems for the carpenter bees. So it's a wonderful plant, and a good example of the size of flower going for the particular bee that prefers it. So the short tongues, Xanthorrhea, no worries. But as well as that, you've got stems of the Xanthorrhea, and that's the favourite habitat for the carpenters.
And what about plants that are sort of closer into the city, because we don't get as many Xanthorrheas. Xanthorrheas are the grass trees.
Grass trees.
Yeah, grass trees, yeah.
So we looked at, I don't know if you guys have the plant, we might just move into plants, because we got 10 minutes to go. So let's just
screen share.
Yeah, so if we can screen share, we did Coria alba in the first week, I think, the guys who were here for the first week. It's a pretty common native plant, and it gets a white flower, and it's I should draw it, but it's like a tube, it's like a bell shaped. It's a tubular flower with a little frill.
Yes.
Like a fuchsia. Yes. Native fuchsia, they call it. So that would be suited, I imagine, to the long-tongued bee, because the nectar's right up the end of the tube. That's right. So the bee comes along, sticks its long tongue in there, and gets the nectar out of the end. Yeah. Whereas if you're a short-tongued bee, you can't get access necessarily to that nectar so easily. It's generalisation here. So, but there are flowers like. Let me see.
So just to mention for those, for all of you in Zoom, it's the white coria is on page 23, but I have screen shared.
So that's one type. Yeah, so that's the white coria. And I just want to get another type. This one, the Cuddly Daisy, which is on page 7. Brachycomb.
Yeah.
So that's quite a different shaped flower.
Yes, it's very open.
Very open and very flat.
Everything will love it.
Yeah, so which bees do you think would really love these guys?
Short tongue.
Yeah, there you go. So, so this is another, so diversity. So I would think when you're choosing your plants, if you can just maybe keep that in mind as a general rule. Your daisy type flowers, your flat flowers where the nectar and the pollen is presented right up front. Short tongue bees will go for those and the long tongue, but the long tubular type flowers like the coria are more suited to the long tongue. So if you can have
pig face.
Sorry.
And pig face.
Yeah.
Pig face.
Yeah. Pig face
it's really.
Okay, so that's something to just keep in mind, the general rule.
Yes, I must also say that all the flowers, for example, your Veronias, the ones which have a pea-like flower, some of the bees have actually got an adapted face, like the Yellow Mast Bee. They would actually headbutt the flower and walk in and separate the petals. So they, even though they might have a very long tongue, they in getting there. And again, some of those flowers are specially adapted to make sure that some of their pollen, no matter what the bee is, they're going to get it whether it's a long tongue or a short tongue, as long as the bee gets in there to get to that nectar. And that's the come on to the bee. Here's the nectar, but at the same time, here's your pollen share as well. I'm just trying to think, do you have an example of trigger plants? The trigger plants are a very special Australian native plant. It actually has a spring-loaded section where as soon as the lower leaves are landed on by a bee or a wasp, it will trigger and immediately hit the bee on the back. It's a split-second thing, but it's just the most amazing thing if you can see it happen.
So that's the pollen.
There's the pollen. It actually hits the bee on the back quite smartly, and to make sure that it gets its load of pollen.
Yeah. And of course, so then the bee flies off to another plant, another flower, puts the pollen, makes those. Yeah. All right, so we'll move on to our plants for this week. And I've chosen some that I'm pretty sure I've seen bees on all of these guys.
Yes, that's good. I love that.
Yeah, we'll start with that one.
Oh, so, do you want me to screen share or go?
We'll go. Probably best to screen share it. So this is.
So they can't see it. So
they can't. Oh, you're on screen share. Okay.
Yours.
Yeah, that's fine. So coastal rosemary should be on your screen.
Give me a second. So this is on page 15. The stringer.
All right, so this is really good for bees. Partly, yeah, really hardy, really loves hot, dry conditions, coastal conditions. It's pretty common around this area for a reason, because it's easy to grow. The benefit to bees, I don't know what it says in the notes, but it gets these white flowers, which would be suited to both long and short tongues, yeah, I'm guessing. But they flowers, we're back on, the flowers a lot. Okay, so it flowers nearly all year. It's flowering at the moment. So when you're thinking, it's another thing, when you're thinking about providing habitat for bees, and particularly providing food, the flowers are where the food is. If you can have something flowering pretty much all of the year, maybe July, August, not so important because they're a little bit more dormant. But this will really help the bees to find a food source throughout most of the year. So, yeah, so that's the Westringia fruticosa, coastal rosemary, because it looks like rosemary. You can hedge it. It grows about, this is our shrub layer, grows to a metre and a half. Anything else to mention about this guy? That's a very hardy plant. Yeah, good one. That's a good one for any garden, really. Back down to our kind of ground layer. So it's not really a ground cover. It's one of our grassy type plants, but it will spread. It forms a bit of a clump that kind of spreads around. Anyone know what this one is?
Dianella?
Yeah, so it's a Dianella. I think this is a Corophragma
Congesta.
Congesta.
Which is on page 5.
Yeah. Alright, now these are good habitat for a lot of things. Frogs, I imagine, will love them because they can hide in amongst the big clump. But these get a beautiful purple flower on it. And it's always got native bees on it. Blue bandits love them, and so do the teddy bear bees. Yeah. And your tetragonulas, your beehive bees love this as well. When it's flowering, it's a really good source of food, obviously, for your native bees. Again, it's pretty hardy, isn't it? You can just bung this in, and 2 years later, you've got a big clump of stuff, and they're producing flowers in spring. Yeah, spring and summer. I can't remember. Pretty regularly, that's super cool.
Very, very good plant. Yes, definitely a good spring feeding plant for your bees.
Yep, there you go. And it also gets a purple berry that we can eat, so it's edible berry. You'd look at it and you'd think it would kill you, but it doesn't. It's actually quite edible. So that's Dianella congesta. Well, there's a few different varieties, lots of different varieties. But Dianella, really hardy, great native plant, great understory. It'll grow in a bit of shade, fairly, semi-shade, quite deep shade actually, and full sun, so really versatile. And our last one, Gavin's excited about this one. What? This, does anyone recognise this? I'll hold it up. It's normally.
Is it a camellia?
Oh.
Hardenbergia.
No. Good guess. It's actually a tree, so up in that tree layer.
Oh.
I don't think it's a Brimbia. It's actually a, do you recognise?
I'm thinking, I'm not saying anything.
I
haven't got the glasses.
Yeah, I only know because I picked it up. Angophora. So it's an Angophora costata, I think this one, the red.
Sydney red gum.
Thank you, Sydney red gum.
On page 31.
Page 31. It's a big tree, big tree. Gets quite enormous. Has a beautiful red trunk, smooth. They're a gorgeous tree. Flowers in spring-ish. Anyway, all the information is in here. The reason I picked it for bees is
it's a tree top flowering, harvesting bees. You'll hear this tree when you approach it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when it's flowering, yeah, it's amazing. So the bees absolutely adore it. Now the way that you can tell, well, we're almost out of time. So the way you can tell an Angophora versus the eucalypt, Angophora see how the leaves are coming out of the main branch and they're coming out of the same spot. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that will tell you it's an Angophora. If it was a eucalypt, they would be staggered. So this leaf would be coming out halfway up. So they're more. So this is called opposite. So most of your Angophoras are opposite.
I was yelling out gum, but you couldn't hear me.
Yeah, it is a gum. So gum is kind of the common name for a heap of different trees. So yeah, so that's a really good one. So those three are really good for these. The Angophora, the big tree. What was the shrub?
Coastal cherry.
Sorry?
Westringia.
Yeah, Westringia, the shrub, and the grassy low thing.
Dianella.
Dianella, cool.
Absolutely.
All right. So we've got to wind down now. We're 2:30.
Thank you so much. It was absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Could I ask
Oh, dear.
Yeah, so big thanks to Gav.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gavin.
Thank
you.
Could
I ask one quick question?
Their hives here on site, right? 2 of your hives are here on site.
Oh, yes, this is two hives here. One is traditional. Actually, it's not. It's the great Australian invention, the flow hive. And we're going to try, once this damn virus disappears, we will have a field day here. But if you're walking through the area, go over and have a look at the hives. There's a small one which is called a Warre, which is a French design, very traditional French design. The other one is the Australian flow hive. Which revolutionised the honeybee harvesting.
Cool. I think we've got time for one last really quick question.
Thank you. Yeah, I have some native bees that I'm looking after for someone. They haven't told me what sort they are, but I've noticed in the last couple of weeks that the bees are coming out of the hive with these little tiny balls of something, I don't know what, and leaving them in this big pile that's getting bigger. Is this a problem that I need to take care of? Do you know what they might be doing?
Is it a native beehive?
It's a native beehive, yeah.
So I think they're tetragonulars, and they're bringing little balls out and leaving them.
Oh yes, yes. Yes, I was exhibiting at the Royal Leicester Show. It took me a long while to get the idea that they are a stingless bee across to the runners of the show. Anyway, that's another story, but I used to actually pick those little balls up and put them in children's hands and say, look at these little things, and they'd be fascinated. And when as soon as I said they were bee poo, they'd scream and run. They're in fact little balls of wax. The tetragon bee is the cleanest, one of the cleanest bees in the world. As soon as it hatches, it rolls up its bedding, which is wax, into a little ball, and the worker bees take it out and fly away with it or drop it outside the hive.
Oh, okay.
It's unbelievable. So every time they just keep building a whole new set of comb the whole time. It's
So this
just,
is a good sign they're having babies.
it means they're having
Great. Great.
They're baby bees are being born.
Yes, excellent.
So beautiful bee words.
Right.
All right.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right. So next week.
gentlemen.
Yeah. Thanks for everyone on Zoom. Thanks, Gavin.
Yeah, next week we've got Renee, our expert Renee, in on birds. And this is apparently actually a very special sort of that actually, in some ways, does better than some of the places you might expect, like Continual Park. It's huge over there. Actually, have some things that they don't.
So hopefully we'll see you next week, but it's really cool, really interesting. We'll have you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, Kevin. Bye.
Bye.